Welcome to Charter California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. Glad you're with us today. Over this half hour, we'll be speaking with three people that are elected officials working in education. We start with Virginia Blumenthal. She is the president of the Riverside Community College District, and I thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
I actually just drove by RCC going to the Salted Pig, which is a great restaurant in Riverside. I enjoyed that food very much. Looks like it's hustle and bustle on the campus, which begs the question, what a difference a year makes.
What a difference a year makes is correct. We have been able to add, actually we have added approximately 5,500 seats. When I say that, what I mean is we offered 158 sections more this year that had been deleted previously. And of course, your cores like English, science, math, and so on, your transfer, your general education are the ones who get hit the hardest.
Right.
So by adding about 158 sections, multiply that times 100 or 35 students per class, that's about 5,500 seats.
And the great news is you are not alone. I understand that the chancellor held a survey, the chancellor of the entire system, Bryce Harris, is that his name? And 84% of all 112 colleges reported that they were adding sections.
Correct.
So this is great news. 90% have increasing enrollment.
We do too. Actually, from last winter to this winter session, or the fall session, we have gone up 30%.
Why? Other than, I mean, look, I could say why, but what is exactly happening? Why is this year so much better?
Because we're offering more sections. Students can get classes.
Why is that? Is it Prop 30? Is it improving economy?
It's all of the above, actually. Prop 30 does help because they're not cutting our budgets anymore.
Right. I know Prop 30 didn't give new money to...
but it didn't cut us.
Right.
And we were, you know, when 85% of your budget is salaries, the only thing you have to cut after you get rid of all of the fringe basically is classes. And no one wants to do that to the students.
And so I'm sure it must be nice walking around the campus and seeing smiling faces with much fewer people on wait lists. I understand the wait list number also shrunk dramatically system-wide, and that can be so very frustrating. I mentioned to you, Virginia, that I had the honor of moderating a city council debate here in Riverside. There's a single contest on an upcoming ballot. And I look down at the questions, and there's your name. And I'm thinking, how did Virginia Blumenthal get dragged into a city council debate? She's on the Riverside Community College District. And it actually was a very important question. And it deals with what we know as project labor agreements. This is above and beyond collective bargaining.
Correct.
This is a whole different beast. And RCCD a couple of years ago passed what's known as a project labor agreement. Could you explain what it is?
Yes.
And why, in the question that I read, it said that Virginia Blumenthal said that it is costing the district 20% more than it should.
Yes. First off, project labor agreements, it did pass our district by a 3-2 vote. So whatever I say here is my own personal opinion. It is not a reflection of the board's opinion, because as a board member, I have to uphold their vote.
And you happen to have been, I will say, in the two.
That's correct.
Okay.
Project labor agreements basically set forth certain criteria for the hiring of construction companies or people to work on projects. In our particular case, any dollars that came from Measure C, which is a bond that was passed by the people, if it was $1 million, or any money rather, of a project $1 million or more, if there's $1 of Measure C monies used, you had to follow the project labor agreement.
So this is not collective bargaining. No. This is beyond collective bargaining.
It has nothing to do with collective bargaining. And it has nothing to do
prevailing wage, living wage.
If they do any project with us, they have to pay prevailing wage.
Right.
That
you already have that.
We already have that. What happens here is if I'm a contractor and I want to do a building for RCC, I can use 6 of my own employees. See, I've got 100 employees. And I can use 6. When I start with a 7th, every time I hire one of mine, I have to hire one of the unions. I have heard complaints that the unions don't always send these employers their best union people because they don't want the contractors hiring them, is what I have been told. But what happens is these people have never worked together before. They're not employees. They don't know what the system is. My employees work a certain way for me. And on top of hiring out of the union hall, you don't get to use your own employees then. You have to contribute to their benefits. You have to pay union dues. And what happens is it runs the cost up so much higher. One of the things that drives costs down basically is a bidding process. If you are hamstringed where your private company, that is non-unionized contractors, cannot bid because it's going to be too costly, and it's hard to handle because you're dealing with employees that you don't know, that you don't have the same way of correcting their behavior if it's not helping the company and if it's not helping the customer for whom you are building. And I have found that where we used to get 35 bids on a project, we might get 3 or 4.
Because they're not on the list? They haven't been pre-qualified under the project labor?
No, they don't want, private people who are non-unionized companies don't want to deal with it. So they don't bid. So generally speaking, the only people who are remaining on it are the union contractors, and you don't have to bid as low. And so that's what happens.
So it was interesting because both those city council members, candidates, said they weren't opposed to prevailing wage.
No.
They weren't opposed to working with unions. It's just this was a step that was just too far.
That's what I believe. I'm not opposed to unions, and I'm not opposed to working with union contractors by any means. I think that what's best for the public is you have a competitive bidding. And assuming that that contractor is qualified, and assuming that they have all the bonding in place and everything, and most of them would have references, then you need to go with the lowest bidder. And I think you give more points for who goes local, too. I think we want to try to keep the contractors as local as possible.
So how long is this PLA in place?
It was put in place about 3 years ago, and it was a 5-year contract.
And so when that 5 years ends, it may or may not be renewed.
That's correct.
And that all depends on the makeup of the board.
Yes, I would suspect
simple.
that's correct.
I want to talk about an honors program that you have at RCC. I know that you're exceptionally proud of it.
Very much so.
And it must be you must be filled with pride given that many RCC students matriculate. It could be to UCR, UCI, CSU San Bernardino.
Well, it's getting better than that even. We have an honors program. I love our district and how innovative we get to try to help our students in the face of all the decreasing funds.
Right.
We have an honors program that basically has increased our students' acceptance rates into the colleges and universities by over 50% in some instances.
Fantastic.
Our students are now getting accepted at Berkeley, Stanford, Riverside, UCLA. And to give you an example, it's like an AP program.
Right.
It is much more intense. They are learning concepts, not rote memory. And it's an accelerated program.
And let us remember, community colleges are not what they were when we were going to community college.
That's correct.
They are places of outstanding education for those that may not be able to afford 4 years. They can afford 2 years at a higher institution. So it's not as if you're getting the, I don't want to use this word, but you know, the kids who screwed up in high school.
No. Or even if you did, that does not mean they don't have the capability of doing it.
Exactly.
You know, high school is a whole different level than by the time they get to college or maybe have gone into the military.
Right.
We have seen the, for example, the acceptance rate of our honors students by UCLA go from 20 to 30% of the students up to 80% if they're coming out of the honors program.
How does one get into the honors program? Do
well,
you know?
Yes, you have to have certain grades to begin with.
Meaning out of high school or since you've already been at RCC?
If you've been out of high school, high school will qualify you initially, but let's assume you've been out of high school for a while and you have come back in.
Right.
It's basically how you're doing in some of your other classes that will get you in there.
How did RCC start this program? What?
We have some amazing faculty members who come up with some of the ideas, and you have a board and administration that's very open to listening to new ideas.
And I understand that as we speak, we are looking for a new superintendent, is that right?
New chancellor.
New chancellor,
Yes,
that's the
yes,
term,
we are.
for RCC.
Well, no, for the district.
For the RCC includes 3 campuses.
3 colleges.
3 colleges.
I don't mean to correct you.
No,
I apologize.
Please. 3
independent, fully accredited colleges.
that are part of the district.
That's correct.
In Riverside, in Norco, and in
Merino Valley.
Merino Valley. Wow.
Correct.
And so how's the search going as we speak
We're
today?
just beginning.
Right.
What we did was the interim chancellor is Dr. Cynthia Azari. She was president, and still is actually president of Riverside City College.
Oh, I see. Yes.
But she is now interim chancellor as the search goes on. We have just begun that process. The board just voted at the last board meeting to hire the consulting firm of Sperry McNaughton to begin that search.
Her name is Virginia Blumenthal. She is the president of the RCCD. My name is Brad Pomerance. When we come back, we speak with one of her colleagues, Nathan Miller. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back.
In what decade were project labor agreements first used in the United States? The 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, or 1950s? project labor agreement were first used on the big public works projects of the 1930s, including Grand Coulee Dam, Hoover Dam, and Shasta Dam.
Welcome back. You're watching Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest is Nathan Miller. He is a trustee with the Riverside Community College District, but he was recently elected president of the California Young Republican Federation. Congratulations. A tremendous victory. What went right, sir?
It was, for me, it was a fundamental race. In any election, if you're running for an office, you want to have a registration advantage. And then at the end of the day, you got to get out the vote. So we made sure that we had significant advantages with regard to club support, delegate support within those clubs. And then it was a matter of raising funds to ensure that we could get everybody there to the convention and vote accordingly.
I have to think, though, that this is a challenging time for the Republican Party in California. When you look at registration over the last 10 years, Democratic registration has remained fairly constant. Republican registration is dropping. And it's interesting. It's
we're on the way to being a third party
in some counties
behind decline to state voters.
So where does the Republican Party go from here? Because, look, I mean, I saw recently that the Republicans in the legislature in Sacramento passed a resolution calling for immigration reform. That is not the National Republican Party. I mean, clearly this is, the state Republican Party is very different from the National Republican Party, but this state party gets really tarred by what's happening nationally. So talk to me.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head. When there are some folks that think we need to reevaluate our message here in California, it has no value when you're talking about people's perceptions of political parties. It's the national message that sets the pace. When people think Democrat, they think what's being done nationally. When they think Republican, they think what's being done nationally.
And what's so interesting is, look, we know a lot of the same people in terms of elected officials on the Republican side. Bob Huff, who's from this region, he's the GOP leader in the Senate. Connie Conway from Central California, GOP leader in the Assembly. They're really not so interested in defining rape or who's marrying whom. It's really a business-driven message. But like you said, because the national agenda is focused upon how do you define rape and who's marrying whom, it's tough for California Republicans to get out their pro-business message.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, whenever a kook pops up and has something interesting to say, that's what's given attention. Whatever the rational message that's coming out nationally, that doesn't get as much attention, unfortunately. There needs to definitely be a little more balance restored with regard to, what's best for this country and what the different ideas are.
So let's talk about what you plan to do as president of the YRs here in California. No doubt that young voters are always willing to listen to new ideas. Some may be entrenched in one party or the other because their parents were one party or the other. So how do you hope to really target your message to young voters who are just figuring out where their political affiliations lie?
Well, it's all fundamentals. I think California and local districts are better when there's more balance. I think an even balance of both parties holds elected officials accountable. You'll have rational decision-making taking place. Whenever you have one party that has an overwhelming advantage over the others, that's when absolute power corrupts, absolutely.
So what's your message to young voters?
It's less of a message and it's more about fundamentals. First of all, with regard to our organization, you need to think about the fundamental role that our organization plays. And it's not issue advocacy. It's a California Young Republican Federation. Step one is expanding existing clubs and attracting new members. Step two is finding places where clubs don't exist and find folks to seed those clubs and get them to expand as well. Step three is raise money to fund the revolution. And then step four is to use those funds to deploy the bodies that we recruit in the competitive election cycle that's coming in 2014.
That really is key because there is no doubt that bodies matter. And let's face it, young bodies will walk precincts more than older bodies will.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, young folks that you want to recruit want to feel like their voice matters, that there's there's a benefit to investing into that organization, that they're going to get something out of it, and what they are going to get out of it, and what I'm going to drive them towards, is jobs, opportunities. People that are interested in getting involved in politics, I want to encourage that activity. I want to see them get jobs with campaigns, with elected officials.
Well, you're a perfect example. I mean, you no longer are working for an elected official, but you had worked for one of the well-liked members in this region, and I understand that part of the reason you were able to land that job is because you'd been involved.
Yeah, and you've got to put your time in. You've got to work hard. Showing up is 90% of it. You show up. You want to be where you're supposed to be. Make all the right connections, and we want to help those that are interested in being active in politics achieve those goals.
Right. Now, not only are you the president of this young federation, but you are also an elected member. You're a perfect example. You're an elected member, a young man who was elected to the Riverside Community College District, which is one of the really strong community college districts in this state. I want to get a sense from you, sir, about how this year compares to last.
You mean this election cycle?
No. Meaning as a community college district.
For, budget-wise,
yeah,
financially?
budget-wise, because I have to think it's a better year.
Yeah, it's a better year. Our budget is solvent.
Right.
140 million plus. There's about 138 million plus expected in revenue. We have improved our reserves. I think it's 3.8, maybe off by a point. I don't want to see a budget come before us next year that doesn't include a restored 5% reserve.
Right.
And I'm confident that we can get there. There's a lot of systemic decisions that are made with regard to the budget where funds have to be allocated, but we have a pretty good idea that a lot of those funds aren't going to be used. So we end up at the end of the year with something like an 11 to 12% reserve, that's not technically anticipated.
What I understand is that when you look at all community colleges in the state, that this year, the first year in many years where there was actually increasing enrollment, increasing class sections, and so it really is a better day. Is that fair, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would expect more of the same in the next cycle. I think there's a big question mark on 2015. There seems to be another housing bubble looming, and it might be peaking as we speak. The Affordable Care Act is going to have an impact on our economy. I know there's folks with a doom and gloom scenario, and then there's other folks with the rosier scenario. I think the appropriate scenario is just uncertainty. So what does that mean for our economy moving into 2015?
I want to ask you about a bill that, as we speak today, we don't know what the governor will do. Let's presume that he will sign this bill, and this bill deals with intersession classes. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's a model whereby certain colleges, and I know RCC is not part of this pilot program, would be allowed to charge a non-resident rate for these impacted classes during winter session or summer session. What's your sense of this intersession bill? It's very controversial, very controversial.
To be honest with you, I haven't followed up on it obviously as much as you have.
No, but I understand. But this whole notion of alternate funding models.
Well, my stance has always been that, the solution to restoring education, back to where it ought to be, where people feel confident about what our schools are accomplishing, rests on the local level. The more distant it becomes, where Sacramento and Washington, D.C. are manipulating our budgets, we still have these problems. And there's only so much that we can do. And anything that's a free market solution like that, where there are folks that are willing to pay it, and it means greater revenue for the community college districts, it's something that I'm willing to explore.
Right.
I mean,
please.
The basic principle is, when the money goes directly to Sacramento and then it gets funneled down a pipeline that eventually lands in our community college district, there's all kinds of folks that are getting paid for things and making decisions that would be much better made locally. So why is all that money going up there?
Yeah, no, it's a valid question. We'll have to see what happens with intersession funding models. His name is Nathan Miller. He is the new president of the California Young Republican Federation, recently elected by his peers, also a member of the Riverside Community College District Board of Trustees. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Tom Hunt. He's a trustee with the Riverside Unified School District. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's Starter California Edition.
What percentage of community college students in the United States is attending a community college in California? 10, 15, 20, or 25%? 1/4 of all community college students nationwide are enrolled in a California community college.
It's Charter California edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest, Tom Hunt. He's a member of the school board at Riverside Unified School District. And so I want to speak with you about the new funding formulas that have been put into place by the state of California. It's called the Local Control Funding Formula. It's really a revolution in education funding. Talk to us about how Riverside's adjusting to this new world.
Well, we're studying it as a board, and we need to move faster on it. We need to. We haven't had the conversations I would like to have as a board member with our teachers on this. They have to be very much a part of this. You're right. It is a revolution. 50 years of arcane funding by the state changed.
Right. What it had been is there were very specific mandates. They were known as categoricals, 50 or 60 categoricals. Those have been all but eliminated. They're still about under 10 or so.
Right.
But now what you're seeing is base grants going back to pre-recession levels, which I'm sure is very much appreciated.
Yes.
But then there are bumps for school districts that educate more English language learners, economically disadvantaged, foster kids. Riverside qualify for some of those bumps?
Yes, we do. We definitely do. We have a large Hispanic population, and a portion of that, of course, is English language learners.
Right.
Riverside has a lot of foster homes and foster kids. I think we have 1,000 homeless kids in our population. That's quite a story.
The question, though, is that yes, there are fewer categoricals, and so there aren't as many mandates coming directly from the state.
Praise God.
The flip side, though, is, with power comes responsibility.
Yes.
And so are school districts ready to assume the responsibilities without having specific dictates from the state?
I believe they are. Though Torkelson will...
That's the superintendent of public instruction.
Thank you, sir. Will have his mandates. Yes, I think we are. We're blessed in Riverside to have UCR, Cal Baptist, and LSU, plus a great community college system. We need to begin to partner with them and with the business community, Brad, to develop an accountability system and chart where we want to go as a community with K-12 education.
What's interesting is while California is providing local school districts with more control over their vision for their districts, you have Common Core adopted throughout the entire nation, or about 45 states, which sets a set of standards. Now, there is some discretion, but it does seem to be a push and a pull. We're kind of nationalizing education, but then the state is decentralizing education.
I think the LA Times in a recent editorial talked about this and compared California and the federal government. Tom Torkelson and U.S. Department of Education Secretary Arnie Duncan has the Hatfields and the McCoys.
Yes.
And, the reckoning day is coming.
And let's talk about that, because in addition to the local control funding formula passing, there was another bill that was passed that caused this Hatfield and McCoy feud between Mr. Torkelson and Mr. Duncan, and it dealt with standardized testing. As you know, Common Core completely changes the bubbleized formulas that we have known for years, and brings forth a different type of testing where if you get a question right, you go to question A. If you get a question wrong, you go to question B. California wants to adopt that quickly, and they're moving forward to adopt it. But the problem is that they're not going to report scores as they're going through this change in standardized testing, and that comes up against the federal government, who wants scores reported as part of Race to the Top and other programs.
One of the things that surprised me about the Obama administration, first term and now second, is that they've accepted this No Child Left Behind, which was poorly written legislation.
Which was under President Bush.
Under President Bush. And Arnie Duncan, I think, is an enlightened man, but right now I believe he's acting inside the Beltway. He's a fussy bureaucrat, and Torkelson's trying to bring California forward. I like Tom, and I think I think the bill you were talking about is AB 484, and I like Common Core, and not on my board does, but I mean, it's the law now, because I think it does help with critical thinking. And we have to get back to that instead of the memorize and regurgitate.
And there is no doubt that Common Core, like what's happened with funding for the state of California in terms of education, is a revolution. I mean, it really is changing how kids are going to be educated. There's going to be much more focus on this kind of deep analysis. And instead of knowing A little about a lot. Common Core hopes that the students will know a lot about, I'll say a little, but I'm exaggerating to make a point.
But they'll learn to have the tools to dissect problems as adults, to chart courses for themselves. And that's a problem I have with battles like this you just described, is I have a sense of urgency that we seem in education to want to debate and all, and at the same time, the product's moving through the assembly line.
The product being our children.
Right, and I was surprised, you know, Brad, my daughter's now out of high school.
And doing quite well despite her father.
Yeah, despite, well, you haven't met the mother.
Right, exactly.
But, you know, they're 25 now, 22, and I'm struck by how quickly they grew up. And recently I did the graduation, recently being June, at North High School. Great school, and it's one of our most racially mixed, diverse schools. We have our IB program there and everything.
Baccalaureate program.
And it's on the kind of the east sides, which is highly Hispanic and African American area. Great school. 49% of the kids had signed up for a 2-year or 4-year college.
Not bad.
2% were going to go on to the military.
Not bad.
I also spoke, though, to those other 49%.
Right.
And I'm concerned about them.
Right.
And I talked to them about a couple web pages, and I handed out some cards that about careers. They're the 49% that are going to stay. They're going to be my neighbor, and I want them to have good jobs. And I want to prepare them in such a way we can advertise that the XYZ widget company will say, well, that's what we need. That workforce is good.
Let's talk about their younger siblings, because they're still in the system.
Yeah.
And my question is, for students of color, does Common Core consider their challenges, to the extent there are specific challenges to those groups?
Well, it considers by, oh, I'm sorry, I was thinking local funding.
Yeah, Common Core.
You know, but I don't think I can answer that question.
Fair enough.
And I'll
that's
get
fair
back
enough.
to you. That's good. That's a good question. Thank you.
Now, here's another question, and my guess is you won't be able to answer this because no one has been able to answer it, but I do want to bring up this point.
Right.
There is no question that Common Core is changing the way we're educating our students.
Right.
And it's changing the way we look at standardized testing.
Yes.
And it's not the bubbleized tests for our standardized testing for K-12. But what about the SAT? What about the ACT? Are they going to change the way they test to look towards Common Core and its adoption? I mean, I don't think the SAT is moving away from bubbleized tests. I don't think the SAT is going to have, if you get this question right, you'll go to the next question A. If you get it wrong, you go to B. I mean, that's my biggest concern, is that we still have bubbleized testing for the most important standardized test of all, getting into college.
Yeah, there's a little bit of essays in there, but...
yeah, but that's like a third section that no one really pays attention to at this stage.
I have been impressed in my nearly 6 years on the school board at what a multi-billion-dollar company education is. I mean, overall, industry, I should say. And if the SAT and ACT folks look at how quickly, if you think about it, in time, 12, 15 years, that No Child Left Behind's been around, and now they don't want to be they think they're the dog. Right. And they're not going to let the tail wag it. But they should.
Right, but here's the problem, is that if you happen to be in 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, the SAT is right around the corner. Yep. The SAT needs to adjust quickly for these children, or these children are going to really suffer because they're not going to be prepared to take a bubbleized test when for 3 and 4 years the schools have been doing everything they can to get them out of this bubbleized test form tableau.
Well,
so
you're right. I can't answer it.
Now.
It's university. I think perhaps we could start with, and maybe these correlations, these partnerships will help. We could start with the UC system and the Cal State system. Tim White used to be at UCR.
Sure. Now head of CSU.
Right. And you know, as you saw this morning's paper, our superintendent's leaving to go to Santa Ana, but Tim still lives and so will Rick in Riverside. Riverside.
In the area.
In the area, and very enlightened person. And we have a new chancellor, so I think those are things to bring up.
These are very serious. I honestly believe these are very serious issues. Is RUSD, as an example of any school district, ready for the technology element of Common Core? Because it really demands kids have access to technology.
We're arguably more prepared than any district in the state. Rick Miller really did some things, and particularly in technology. I remember we had lunch with this fellow from Rodney Couch's brother, from Apple, and he said, we have this new thing. It was my first guy on the board. I want to show it to you. And he brings out an iPad.
It's crazy.
And one of my colleagues has been around a long time. She said, can you make it smell more like a book?
I love it. His name is Tom Bundy. He's a member of the Riverside Unified School Board. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is Charter California Edition.